Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this second session of the Indian Express Explained. Explained, as a lot of you already know, is the space in the Indian Express where we help you understand the news, the background, the context, connecting the dots, all the things that really matter to you beyond the news. And it is devoid of the shouty, screechy opinion that is often accompanied by these discussions. Now, this session of Indian Express Explained is on uncertain markets in uncertain times, essentially to help us understand the economic fallout of the lockdown and the crisis and what follows. I mean, the lockdown will, a further round of easing is due in a couple of days, but what is not going to sort of change really fast is the economic situation. And to help us understand this economic situation and especially markets, we have Mr. Nilesh Shah, Managing Director of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company Limited. Mr. Shah, as the cliche goes, needs no introduction. All of you are here, already know him. Over 25 years of experience in the capital markets and market-related investments, and he's got this huge cult following in social media and everywhere else. Mr. Shah, welcome very much. Thank you. Thank you. Talking to Mr. Shah will be our colleagues, P. Vaidyanathan Iyer. He is both the macro and the micro guy here and at the Indian Express, reported on the economy and markets for 20 years. And Sandeep Singh, he also very closely tracks markets, corporates, investments. He's the money guy at the Indian Express. And this session of, this is very important, this session of the Indian Express Explained, brought to you by the Association of Mutual Funds in India, AMFI. Thank you very much. And the way this will work is I will now pass on to my colleague Vaidi, and Vaidi will do a presentation, basically setting the stage, the context for what is going to follow. About 40 minutes of explanatory discussion between Mr. Shah, Vaidi, and Sandeep will follow, after which we shall open the floor to the virtual floor to some of you. There's a very large number of you here. So what will happen is we have a set of questions that you've already sent us. And during the period at which this conversation between Vaidi and Mr. Shah and Sandeep goes on, you can send us our questions. And then for about 30 minutes or so after this conversation ends, we will take some questions from you. So welcome once again, all of you. And Vaidi, all yours.
Thank you so much, Monojit. Welcome, Nilesh. I think it's heartening to see that your cult following on the online media given the lockdown. So thank you so much for sparing time, because I think these are very uncertain times, and people look for expert advice, and Explained is all about that, where you bring in domain knowledge and expertise. So to set the context, I don't wish to take much time. People would like to listen to Nilesh more. So I'll just quickly set the stage for what the context is. And before I end, and I'll repeat this, please put your questions on the Q&A icon, which is there on the Zoom application. And also that I request audience not to ask any stock-specific questions, because Nilesh has to comply with regulatory requirements of the Securities and Exchange Board of India. So he will be unable to answer any of those. So I would really request that you avoid stock-specific questions during the discussion. So yeah, as I said that we are living in very uncertain times, and yeah, so I basically thought that roughly 3 or 4 aspects I would quickly kind of detail here. We all know that the economy has been a very, very major concern, and COVID struck India when the economy was already tottering. 2 years of poor growth. We have had a liquidity problem in the Indian economy for almost 1.5 years, and there were a couple of events which kind of shook investor confidence also. And after the COVID, we have seen most global research houses have kind of estimated that the Indian economy would contract, and what is said is that since 1978-79, this would be the biggest drop in the Indian economy. So we are like Goldman Sachs and Nomura has said that India would contract by about 0.4%. And also, I think, there has been some, in the sense, some what shall I say, IMF has a slightly different view. IMF still thinks that India would grow about 1.9%, and there'll be a very, very sharp recovery in the following year, which is, they expected Indian economy to grow in the next financial year, that is 2021-22, at about 7.4%, which is quite remarkable. But what is worrisome is, how the Indian corporate sector, which, provides jobs to millions of Indians, what is the prognosis for the Indian corporate sector? The COVID has really kind of shut down factory services. So Indian corporate sector, according to a report by CRISIL, the revenues, the top line, which you call, is expected to decline by about 15%, and the profitability by a massive 25 to 30%. So this puts the corporate sector in a spot, and it will be a really rebuilding efforts that would require going henceforth as the economy opens up, as the lockdown relaxations kicking. I think that's a big challenge for the corporate sector. Bigger than that is the livelihood concern. I think today, most, even in the formal sector, have seen salaries being cut by the corporate sector. That is still all right. I think, so many people have lost jobs. Given the demography that India is about, 800 odd million out of the total 1.35 billion under 40, that almost 73% is under 40. So I think this is a huge job crisis that is looming at us right now. And what the package, we have had 2 rounds of packages since yesterday. The Prime Minister announced a 20 lakh crore package, economic package. I wouldn't say that it is a fiscal package, it's an economic package. And then yesterday, the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman did put a lot of time and effort on the medium, small and micro, small and medium industries, enterprises, which is the backbone of the Indian industry, which accounts for roughly, about 28% of the GDP itself, and also, gives jobs. 12 crore jobs are estimated to be provided by the medium, micro, small and medium enterprises. So that is a big worry, which, we would ask Nilesh more about that. And then it is the investor concern, because at the end of the day, what fires the real economy is the financial markets, which is the backbone of any economy. And because credit is very critical in these times of crisis, we have seen that, fundraising, there might be challenges for the corporate sector, because the Sensex has dropped almost 23-24% since COVID since March. And there has been some recovery of about 14%. I think markets fell down to about 23,000. That was the last I remember of the Sensex, and since then the markets have recovered, and the Sensex stands at about 32,000 as on date. So it has had an impact on the assets and the management of mutual fund companies, also asset management companies also. AUMs have declined for both debt and equity. But there is a silver lining, that the good news is that equity inflows, equity inflows have remained positive. They have slowed down, but they are still in the positive territory. So the last aspect, which I think I'll leave it completely to Nilesh during the Q&A, is about how does it impact the retail investor? Where does he put his money? Who saves his money in times of crisis? I think small saving rates are down very sharply. I think they had to be realigned with for lower interest rates for the industry. But then it has an impact on the senior citizens who depend on deposits. There has been a confidence which has been hurt because of many reasons, starting from IL&FS, Yes Bank, and couple of cooperative banks like PMC kind of being superseded by the Reserve Bank of India, and even deposits being being a ceiling on withdrawal of deposits. But we also see that gold has continued to shine. So which is something which we would ask Nilesh to explain. Welcome, Nilesh, once again. Sandeep, would you like to go with the first question?
After the very detailed sort of presentation that we had, Shah, I would like to first try to get a larger sense from you in terms of what do you think of the COVID impact for the economy and businesses. Supposing a vaccine, as you also had earlier told me that once a vaccine is made, I mean, we'll see a big recovery. Supposing the vaccine is ready in 6 to 8 months or a cure is there, how long will it take for us to get back and restart from where we were left in February 2020? I mean, how many months or years have we lost? I mean, just to basically capture this COVID impact for the economy and business.
Sure. Thank you, Vaidhi. Thank you, Sandeep. This is the most unprecedented crisis faced by global economy and India. It's like a George Clooney movie called The Perfect Storm, where a fishing trawler went into a spot where 3 storms were ravaging together. Today, global economy and Indian economy is facing medical crisis, economic crisis, and financial crisis together. This is na bhuto na bhavishyati event. We have never seen anything like this before, and we can pray Almighty that we will not see anything like this in the future. Second, if we just look at in a very simplistic back of the envelope calculation, our GDP is about $3 trillion. If we remain shut for 47 days at 50% capacity utilization, and all months are contributing equally to GDP, which is a wrong assumption, but just for simplicity's sake, then roughly the loss of output at 50% capacity utilization is about $190 billion. Economy is not like power which you can switch on and switch off. So there will be cost of restarting economy added to this number. Against that, we will save $40 to $45 billion in oil import bill if oil prices persist at current level. And we could look to save about $20 billion by replacing made in China goods with made in India goods. Here, to some extent, import movement has been curtailed, so that will help. And to some extent, we will have to make an effort. Net COVID-19 crisis can cause about $130 billion damage to Indian economy, plus whatever is the cost of restarting. And this is where broadly the range of estimate comes. Some people are talking about a drop from 6% to 1.2%. Some people are talking of minus 5.2%. But roughly, this is how the back of the envelope calculation states. Now, more importantly, how do we contain the damage? There are 3 ways of containing this damage. One is attracting foreign direct investment. Second is providing fiscal stimulus. And third is providing monetary stimulus. These 3 steps together, along with obviously medical solution, can reduce the damage to the Indian economy. It can reduce or contain cost to the Indian economy. This is how one will have to look at COVID-19.
Yeah, Nilesh, very interesting, that you also talk about, how Indian manufacturing can replace Chinese imports. But tell us something. In Indian economy has also grown largely on the back of global growth. Whenever there has been strong globalization, opening up of economies by India and the rest of the world, India has piggybacked on that and grown at about 9% or 10, even touching 10%. All this came on the back of sharp globalization, taking off of globalization, and also of the global economy doing well. The Prime Minister did talk about self-reliance. Does it mean that we enter into an era where we are becoming more protective? And how do we kind of reverse this, 2-decade or almost 3-decade long journey where we continuously opened up the economy, let foreign investments come in, liberalized imports, reduced duties? How do you look at the coming 10 years or coming 5 years?
So, Vaidhi, there is no question of going back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s era where India became introvert, and which is where we lost our prominence in global economy. When we got independence, we had higher share in global GDP and higher share in trade balance compared to when we bottomed out in the 70s and 80s. The gains of 1991 liberalization should not be lost. This has put Indian economy from, let's say, sub 4% growth to above 6% growth, or maybe above 5.5% growth to be precise. We have to consolidate further on this and step higher. Now, when I say you replace made in China goods with made in India goods, it doesn't mean that we stop importing from China. But we must stop importing those things which we can easily make in India. For example, when you go out on Diwali day to buy electric lightings, they are all made in China. I'm sure we can make that in India. Today, when you go to buy toys, they are all made in China. We'll have to make a conscious effort in buying made in India toys. By encouraging electric lights, by encouraging toys, by encouraging those goods which can be made in India, we will be able to develop our economy. We will be able to develop our small and medium enterprises and so on and so forth. The second thing is competing with China. For example, we have the world's one of the highest cotton production. We have one of the best quality cotton. We have the world's largest spinning capacity to convert cotton into yarn. We also know how to weave that yarn into fabric. But when it came to the biggest value add of converting that fabric into a garment and putting a brand and send it abroad for exports, we lose out. A country like Bangladesh has 3 times more garment export than India, despite they not growing much cotton or despite they not having much yarn capacity. China imports yarn from us, and their total garment export, including indirect export, is more than India's total export. Now, why have we reached this situation? There are multiple factors: infrastructure, power cost. But I'll give you one small incidence. In China, women are working in 3 shifts. Actually, they work in 2 shifts of 12 hours. And that's why their cost of making garment is much lower. In India's case, we don't allow women to work after 8 p.m. in factories. Now, garments require women. The men don't have ability to stitch good garments. But you allow your factory to work only for 1 8-hour shift. How can you compete with the Chinese factory which is working 24/7? Now, we have to change our rules, regulations so that we can take advantage of our situation and go to value add. Why are we only growing cotton and making yarn and weaving fabrics and giving up value add to Chinese and Bangladesh? We have to retain that value add in India. That's how you become self-reliant. So there is combination of things which we have to do to ensure that we are replacing made in China goods with made in India goods. We are producing made in India goods to compete with China on a fairer terms. And let me give third dimension also. In 1980, China and India were of similar size. They became manufacturer to the world. We were left behind. We have been left behind by such a big margin that from being equal, today we are 1/4 the size of China. Now, how do I close the gap? Well, China became manufacturer to the world by bringing all the foreign direct investment possible. we have to get those companies out of China to India. Today is the best time. The world is suspicious of China. They consider that country who gave Wuhan virus to them. We are being considered positively as we are supplying hydroxychloroquine tablet to the world. And if God willing, we will supply vaccine from Serum Institute Pune to the world. Now we must encash that goodwill in establishing a manufacturing base. We are today back office to the world. Why can't we become factory to the world? Let me give you an example. Samsung is a Korean chaebol, came to India. They make in India consumer durables and mobile phones. They sell in India. It's one of the largest company in India on consumer space, $12 billion turnover. They went to Vietnam much later. They make in Vietnam and sell all over the world. Their turnover in Vietnam is $62 billion. In an economy which is 1/10 the size of India, their turnover is 5 times more. They contribute 28% of GDP to Vietnam. It is more than government of India's contribution to Indian GDP. Now, can we get this kind of companies from China to India, help them establish in India, help them make in India, help them sell in world? Of course, there is a strict, very, very severe competition from other countries to attract companies moving out of China. They have better infrastructure, they have better policies, they have better environment, but none of them have a large domestic market which India has. We have to leverage our brand with the world, we have to leverage our domestic market with the world, and we have to become part of global supply chain management. This is how we can improve India's growth orbit. We are part of global supply chain, and yet we became Atmanirbhar.
Okay. Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a connected question basically. I mean, while we've heard the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister over the last 2 days talking about now pushing the manufacturing, basically also pushing MSMEs, also protecting contracts worth 200 crore for Indian manufacturers. Now, I wanted to kind of understand, even as the push is coming, do you think the MSMEs in India are prepared to cater to the needs of the corporate sector higher up in the value chain? Are the MSMEs ready to climb and narrow the gap? I mean, the quality sort of gap which is required by the Indian manufacturers higher up in the value chain. I mean, where do we stand there? And won't it take a lot of time to kind of bridge that gap? Are we ready now? How long will it take? I mean, basically.
Sandeep bhai, if we see our IT industry, when Fakir Chand Kohli started Tata Consultancy Services, it was Lakhu Udyog. It was micro enterprise. In the days where making a phone call to foreign country would have taken you 24 hours and you would have shouted so loud that your voice would have reached without telephone, he started an IT company. When Narayan Murthy and started Infosys, do you think they were large enterprise? Today, TCS and Infosys dominates IT industry around the world. So there is no doubt that Indian entrepreneurs, be it small and medium entrepreneurs, be it large entrepreneurs, are capable of producing globally successful company. But unfortunately, today entrepreneur is like Abhimanyu. In Satyug, Abhimanyu went into Chakravyuh by his choice. In India, in Kalyug, he is born into Chakravyuh. He is destined to fight market competition, volatility in demand supply, Chinese competition, and so on and so forth. But many a times he's struggling with taxation rules, compliance rules, labor inflexibility, land acquisition norms. Even in Satyug, when Abhimanyu was only fighting Kaurav, and while he was in Chakravyuh, he was under the impression till his last breath that my uncles, my brothers are coming to help me. He still lost out. Now imagine in Kalyug, if Abhimanyu is not only fighting the Kauravas but also the Pandavas who are supposed to support him, how will he become successful? And which is where Prime Minister's announcement that we will focus on land, labor, liquidity, and law. These are the 4 ingredients which will ensure that our Abhimanyu gets supported. And with this in his favor, he will be able to give competition to the rest of the world. We must support entrepreneurship at micro, small, medium, and large level. We have to ensure that they become globally competitive and successful, like Tata Consultancy Services, like Infosys, like Sun Pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth.
So just a quick question. I mean, these companies mostly grew despite the government. I mean, mostly. I mean, then there wasn't an IT ministry then. I mean, they were free to kind of do start on their own, and kind of go ahead, and the entrepreneurs were free. I mean, is there constraint of excess regulation also there now, given that and a constraint that they face a lot of companies across sectors?
I think, Sandeep bhai, it will be unfair to say that this companies grew without government support. All of them have received large land allocation courtesy government. All of them have received labor flexibility, which was not available to manufacturing companies. Imagine if in BPOs we would not have allowed women worker in the night shift. All of them have benefited from Brand India. All of them have benefited from the telecom revolution, which was brought in by the government. So while it is fashionable to say that I have done this without any support from the government, that will be farther from truth. In fact, it's like Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli winning the match. Of course, they go and win the match because they are star players. But do other people don't contribute? If only Virat Kohli was playing, will he be able to win the match? Of course, no. It's a team effort. Entrepreneurs and government are part of the same team. They have to work together to win the match. As simple as that.
Yeah. Nilesh, one thing which which we see, which India saw over the last 1.5 to 2 years is liquidity. Liquidity has been such a big constraint, especially for all the sectors which are receiving support from the government today, be it the MSMEs, be it the non-banking financial companies, be it housing finance companies. So I think all of them have been starved of liquidity for the last 2 years or so. Could things have, of course, things could have been better, could have been different. But now, given that, what the finance minister has announced yesterday for the MSME sector, many people in the industry say that it is the bare minimum that was required for the MSME. Do you think much more needs to be done for the MSME sector? And how will the package announced yesterday kind of free up resources for the MSMEs?
So, Vaidhi, you have been absolutely right that credit growth in last 12 months, 18 months have been slowing down dramatically. I'm just giving number from memory, but last 12 months credit growth was roughly about 6 lakh crore plus something. And in the previous 12 months, it was roughly about 11 lakh crore plus something. Now, if you take out credit by 5 lakh crore, how can your GDP grow? Credit and GDP move in same direction. If credit is not flowing, GDP is bound to slow down. Now, there are multiple reasons why credit growth slowed down. But one of the reasons was that bankers were afraid of lending. They improved their credit lending standards significantly. And that created a scenario where credit flow in economy started slowing down. Now, yesterday's package about small, medium enterprises is fantastic package. It allows banks to lend without worrying about NPA because government is entered. It takes into account not only startups, it's not only talking about giving debt, but also equity. So this is a comprehensive, wholesome solution covering debt and equity, covering standard SMEs and distressed SMEs, and ensuring that bankers are not reluctant to lend. This will go a long way in improving credit flow. If money flows to one pocket of economy, which is MSMEs, it will also start revolving within the economy and improve money multiplier. This is very, very critical. Now, at the same hand, we have also given package for NBFC, 30,000 crore full guarantee, 45,000 crore partial guarantee. Now, we must ensure that both these packages operate on the ground. It should not happen like the real estate fund which we announced last year, and also partial credit guarantee scheme for NBFC which we announced, which didn't result into much traction on the ground because of various rules and regulation. So intention has been set right. Execution also has to follow the intention.
But given the guarantees, you think that the risk aversion of banks would kind of come down, because banks have been worried about not just lending business risk to their own bottom lines, but also about various other things of say the courts, the judiciary, the CBI and the CVC. So I think there are just too many concerns. I think would banks now kind of really push through credit in the system?
Undoubtedly, there are concerns. These are all legitimate concerns, and clearly, government has taken a big step by providing guarantee. This will ensure that bankers will be not afraid of lending, and slowly, we will have to develop a situation where genuine decisions by banks are not subjected to witch hunt by any agency. When you lend money, some decisions will go wrong. That's part and parcel of business. And for commercial decisions, you cannot be going after the bankers. That confidence is the essence of banking. And hopefully, with this guarantees, those fears will be behind us.
Yeah. Sandeep?
Yeah. Now, coming to from the economy to the market side, we saw the Sensex hitting a 3-year low of 27,500 and then bouncing back in April by 15%. Do you think this COVID impact has had its base sort of set for the markets? I mean, or do you think we can still have a situation where it can go down further? I mean, I'm asking just to kind of calm some nerves on how on the market volatility front and how it's likely to behave, just to get a sense of yours on that. Do you think we have already hit a base, or there is a probability of that can go down further also?
Sandeep bhai, I will draw your attention to this chart.
Okay.
On x-axis, I have put medical solution from early to late, and on y-axis is fiscal and monetary stimulus from low to high.
Yeah.
If we are very lucky, medical solution emerges very quickly. It could be combination of drug which will cure patients. It could be vaccine which will prevent occurrence. And we also have large fiscal and monetary stimulus. Then the recovery will be V-shaped. In that scenario, I can safely say that markets have bottomed out.
Okay.
However, in a scenario where medical solution is delayed and fiscal and monetary stimulus is lower than the economy's need, then the recovery will be L-shaped. We will fall sharply, we won't recover. In that scenario, it will be unfair to say that markets have bottomed out. I think intersection of medical solution in the form of combination of drug or vaccine and quality and quantity of fiscal and monetary stimulus, both from intention as well as execution point of view, will determine when our economy bottoms out, and courtesy that when our markets bottom out. Obviously, markets are forward looking, so markets will bottom out way before economy actually bottoms out.
Yeah.
One quick question on today's basically market movement, despite, I mean, yesterday's 6 lakh crore worth of MSME package and all. I mean, do you think market did not take it very positively? I mean, it's a very short-term sort of thing, but just wanted to kind of sense the market's perception on yesterday's announcements.
So today's fall can be attributed more to the global developments where globally markets were down and which probably got reflected into our market. It could also be function of we had risen on the day when PM announced 20 lakh crore package and hence it was already priced in. My feeling is that market is going to swing like a pendulum whenever there is good news about monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus, medical breakthrough, number of deaths coming down, then markets will move up. In absence of those news, markets will go down. Till such time a medical solution emerges, which gives markets certainty that now economic activity will resume normally, I don't think so markets can make a bottom. They will swing from hope to optimism, from fear to, they'll swing from pessimism to optimism, from fear to hope. That swing, that volatility will continue.
Nilesh, the other thing was, while markets did recover, post the, big lows of in March to about 24,000, it went down and now it's about 31, 32. Has it been broad based? We get a sense that a few stocks are kind of taking up the market. So that also kind of factors in that the fiscal and the monetary stimulus so far, which has been given, is basically would benefit the top corporates, and whether the entire thing would kind of flow down. Do you see that happening with the markets as well?
So markets have been extremely polarized. There are few stocks which have done well in Nifty as well as in Nifty mid-cap, and which is why those indexes have not fallen as much as the broad market. I think the package today is geared more towards small and medium enterprises rather than large enterprises. In fact, most of the large enterprises have at worst cash flow mismatches. They don't worry about survivability. Their balance sheet is good. They just need some cash flow so that they can cover the current downturn. It is the small and medium enterprises which really require not only monetary stimulus but also fiscal stimulus, and which is where the steps taken by the government, if executed well on the ground, will be a game changer. And when this small and medium enterprises start functioning with credit flow coming into their balance sheet, that will automatically reinvigorate the economy, and that will be reflected into large companies' P&L account or balance sheet automatically.
Yeah. Nilesh, one thing which kind of I always wonder is like, you are sitting in Bombay, which is the financial capital of the country, the most industrialized state, probably, similar to Gujarat or Tamil Nadu or Karnataka. But Bombay and Pune particularly have been the worst hit. Similarly, Gujarat, I think it is one of the states which is, really causing concerns, which is a hotspot state like Maharashtra. Now that the relaxations are slowly kicking in, and May 17th is one date which everybody looks forward to, do you see that, industrialized states, hotspots in industrialized states will kind of delay the recovery in India, because Bombay has huge numbers and it is the hub? How do you look at this kind of, while we are trying very hard to recover slowly with easing of relaxations, but still some of the hotspots are in the most industrialized states?
Undoubtedly, Vaidik, that is a worry, and we will require Herculean effort from entrepreneurs, businessmen, government, and citizens together. Broadly, if we see, there are three models of containing coronavirus. One is lockdown, which we experimented with, which China did in Wuhan, which France, Italy did little later on. UK did after a lot of damage. The second is South Korea model, where they did random testing in a large quantity and enforced strict quarantine. The third is Japanese model, where there is essentially higher level of public and private hygiene. Most Japanese, when they come out, they are wearing masks, they are washing their hands quite regularly. As a nation, we have to come together to win this battle against coronavirus through all the three models. The citizens have to be conscious about public and private hygiene. They'll have to ensure that they don't end up becoming spreader. The government and medical fraternity will have to increase testing and enforce strict quarantine, and will have to selectively use lockdown so that this virus does not go out of control. Through these three combinations, we will be able to contain damage caused by coronavirus to our economy.
One last question from you, and then I'll probably throw it open to the audience if Sandeep doesn't have any more questions to ask, is about the package so far. So far, the government's focus has been on providing liquidity, which kind of is critical. But the fiscal package has been kind of very muted. That's the sense one gets looking at just the numbers. So in the last, since the first package in the month of March to the last 2 days, the fiscal package, doesn't seem to cross even, 2% of GDP. So do you think on the fiscal side that there is need to kind of give bigger support, not just to the industry, but to a large percentage of the workers, to give them the confidence to return back to work, to urban centers? Because the telling picture of today's lockdown, of India's lockdown, has been the movement of migrant workers, walking hundreds of kilometers. That has been a painful picture. For them to get the confidence that the urban centers care for them and they need to get back to work sooner than later, could the fiscal package be substantially better than what it is?
So today, let's see if this is a one-day match. There are two batsmen playing. One is fiscal stimulus, other is monetary stimulus. Now, normally, one batsman kind of explodes and starts hitting, and the second one tries to give scoring opportunity to the first batsman. If monetary stimulus is in overdrive, like we have seen this in recent time, then probably we can take a back foot on fiscal stimulus. And when monetary stimulus reaches its limit, then we can increase fiscal stimulus. Why is this approach necessary? Well, we are living in an unfair world. Rating agencies are probably having different standards for developing versus developed world. Italy has much higher debt to GDP ratio than India, but for bulk of the past history, they have remained higher than India in terms of rating. Now they are obviously below India's rating, but their borrowing cost is far lower than India. Now we have to maintain path of fiscal prudence so that global rating agencies don't end up downgrading us, so that investors don't get uncomfortable. At the same time, we have to provide support to our economy. And I think if we balance between fiscal and monetary stimulus and allow more of monetary stimulus for the time being, and then appropriate with fiscal stimulus, that will be the best outcome. We are all working within limitation. Theoretically, it's always possible to calculate that we can hit 6 sixes in an over, but that happens once in a blue moon. We have to pace ourselves sufficiently so that we can win the match.
Sandeep, would you like to ask the last question? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Over the last 6 years, we saw a lot of new investors coming through mutual funds into the market. The folios grew from around 3 crore to 6.3 odd crore equity folios, so as to say. The share of small cities, beyond top 110 cities, the AUM has grown from 2.6% to now around 11.5%. Now, for them, this would be the first experience of a downturn for all these new investors. They have not seen financial crisis of 2008-9. For them, this is the first. Do you think this has the potential to scare a lot of investors out of the market? And one more thing, where are you putting your money in? Basically, where are you investing? I mean, which many would want to know to take. Yeah.
So my answer is very simple. I am a mutual fund person, and I have taken a voluntary pledge that whenever I want to invest in mutual fund, I will put my money in Kotak Mutual Fund only. It does not mean that all my savings are in mutual fund only. I am well diversified into mutual funds, equity and debt. I have physical gold for my daughter's wedding. I have real estate. I have public provident fund and provident fund also. So I'm well diversified into debt, equity, real estate and commodity. But whenever I want to invest in mutual fund, I only invest in Kotak Mutual Fund because I believe that if I don't lead by example, how can I request others to copy the same? Now, coming to your question about investors, undoubtedly, when returns become negative, it tastes the nerves of investors. It does create a scare, and which is where we have to pacify them. We have to do hand holding. Today, fortunately, mutual fund industry has more than 100,000 distributors who are doing an excellent job in hand-holding investors through these troubled times. We also have many investors who have gone through experience in 2008, 2013, where they did see index coming down from 21,000 to 8,000 Sensex. And before index touched 21,000, all our mutual fund schemes had crossed their all-time high NAVs. Let me give you an example, Sandeep Bhai, and this is calculation done by Bombay Stock Exchange. Between 1981 to 2020, Sensex total return is about 14.73% per annum. This is including dividend reinvestment. If you remove that, principal return is about 13.71%. This, if you compare with PPF, it's 9.41%. If you compare with fixed deposits, it's 8.62%. If you compare with silver, it is 6.92%. And if you compare with gold, it is 8.48%. So undoubtedly, over a long period of time, equity has created far more wealth than any other. The second question then comes that we are sure about long-term outperformance of equity, but what about the volatility? Now, of course, volatility is high in equity, but gold, which is considered as a steady asset class, between 1981 to 2020, there were 10 years where gold gave negative return. There were 14 years in which Sensex gave negative return. And there were 16 years in which silver gave negative return. Now, if you ask someone that, are you aware that silver has given negative return more than equity have given negative return? Most of the people will say no. They don't do daily mark to market of silver. They'll keep silver, which has probably been brought by their grandfather and it is still lying in their house. People don't do that with equity. And hence, they end up getting scared by the volatility. My recommendation to investors will be, please consult your financial advisor if you are worried about current situation. They will be able to guide you to take right decision. Equity markets are bound to be volatile by nature, which is why they give better return than fixed income or gold or silver or public provident fund. Because you are taking this volatility, this pain, that's why you get higher return. And the best way to benefit out of current situation is to be a long-term investor, to be a regular investor, and to have disciplined asset allocation. These are the three things which I follow in my life. And despite current downturn, I can assure you this has worked well for me, and I'm sure it will work well for you.
So may I now throw it open to the audience? We have already questions from several people. So may I request Vikas Gupta of DBS Bank India Limited to ask Nilesh the question?
Yeah, hi Nilesh, good evening, and it's always great to hear from you. I had a question that on the personal investment side, for the next year and a half, if one were to invest steadily through SIP, then is it better to stay on the large cap, mid cap, or the multi cap side? So, like, what would be your recommendation for a regular investor for next year and a half? And given that uncertainty is still ahead of us, and it will take a while to bounce back. Thank you.
Sure, because if you're looking to invest with 1 to 1.5 year horizon, you are better off investing in fixed income or gold rather than equity. Equity, when you invest, you need to have 5 to 10 year horizon, not 1 to 1.5 year horizon. You yourself are from financial world, so you will be far more savvy compared to average investor. Yet my recommendation will be for 1 to 1.5 year horizon, please invest in short-term bond fund, invest in dynamic bond fund or gold ETF. These are far suitable product in that horizon rather than equity.
Okay. I have also a list of people. May I invite Mr. Rahul Deshpande to ask his question, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just had one question. Presently, the way the pandemic has hit the share market, I just wanted to know: is it the right time? Have we? I think though he answered, Mr. Nilesh has answered the question, but I just wanted to know whether it has hit market. Should we wait or sit on the fence, or should we start investing? Because I have a good, very good exposure there. So I am not regularly investing, but I don't know. In fact, it has hit me hard in April. So I'm right now sitting on the fence and watching when to start. And which are, if at all we have to start, which are the segments, the sectors we should choose? I know you can't talk stock specific.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure, Rahul. Yeah. So Rahul, you are a veteran investor based on your talk, and you must look at your investment objective and risk profile. This is time to be overweight equity and gold. And since we don't know when medical solution will emerge, I will recommend you to divide your incremental investment in equity in two parts. One part to be invested when market is in uncertainty mode about medical solution. This investment must be done in 10 to 15 installments, and especially when markets are falling like today. And the other half you should invest when you are sure that now medical solution has emerged and normal economic activity will resume. That way you will be able to average yourself in the market. Instead of waiting for medical solution to emerge, we have to face the storm and invest when there is uncertainty. Today, it's difficult to value market on a P ratio basis because earnings are uncertain. But if you look at 10-year historical average market cap to GDP ratio, it's roughly about 76%. At bottom, it had gone to 43% in October 2008. Current market cap to GDP ratio is in the range of 50 to 55%. Clearly, we are trading way below historical average because of all these uncertainties. We must take advantage of that by putting part of money in multiple tranches. And we must also keep part of the money to invest when the uncertainty is likely to be behind us. That way you will be able to average yourself into this market.
May I request Sakshi Bharat of Ashoka University to ask a question?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Sakshi.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir, for a very insightful session today. My question is that, keeping in view the current situation, how do you see the business model of cinema has changed in the near future? Because right now, also when we see the competition dynamics playing out, we see that a lot of people have already started preferring streaming platforms over the cinema hall. So, will you say that in the post-COVID era, we will not see any cinema halls, and what will be the business like?
Sakshi, very, very
Thank you.
interesting question. And clearly, entertainment has moved from outdoor to indoor, and theaters will have to work to lure customers into their premises. They can do that by bringing in exclusive cinemas, let's say like Bahubali. It was a movie to be watched on a big screen. I still remember as a kid when Sholay was released in Minerva. I mean, we all rushed to see that again and again because it was a big screen movie. So movies like Sholay, Bahubali will attract customers to premises. Second, this theaters will have to also attract customers on certain other occasions. For example, we have rarely seen a birthday party being celebrated in a theater. Now, can theaters create that magic where a person feels comfortable celebrating an occasion in theater rather than in hotel or somewhere else, where they can combine viewership along with dining and so on and so forth? So, like from theaters, we move to multiplexes. How do we move from multiplexes to fun and entertainment zone will determine how these theaters will be relevant. Today at home, the streaming platforms are giving us convenience. The theaters will have to give us experience. Maybe there will be 4D theaters, maybe there will be 5D theaters. That kind of experience will pull people to move out of their homes to visit these theaters. So each one will have to continue to evolve in order to attract customers.
May I now request Sanjam Chima, National Mission for Clean Ganga in the Ministry of Jal Shakti, to ask his question.
Yes, am I audible?
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Chima. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to ask was that it's been a very insightful discussion that I've just heard. But what specific advice would you have for the small scale investor, in the short term? What should they be doing really in the short term? Long term, of course, we all know one needs to stay invested and wait. But in the short term, what does one do?
Sanjam, if you are an investor, then you can't be short term oriented. Only a trader can be short term oriented. And trading is very, very difficult art. Only few practitioners are successful in trading. On the other hand, investment is a very, very easy art. And yet there are few practitioners who are successful essentially because they want to invest on a short term basis. There is a proverb in Gujarati which says that Utavre amba na pake. You can't get a mango in a short term. If you plant a mango tree, you have to wait for 12 years. You don't go to God and complain that why are you not delivering mango in 1 year? Why can't mango come in short term? You are God. The same way, returns will happen over a period of time, over long term. If you are short term, then you are a trader, not an investor. And then you have to have skill sets of trading. If you are investor, by definition, you are long term. Now, if you have money which requires usage in short term, then you have to invest in safe instruments like fixed income funds, liquid fund. They do get negative return in the month of March for a few days. But over a period of time, if you see the track record, by and large, they have delivered positive return after 7-day, 10-day investment horizon. You can invest in ultra short-term bond funds, again on a 6 months, 12-month horizon. By and large, they have always delivered positive return. So if you're looking for investment from a shorter point of view because you will need money, go into the safety of liquid fund, ultra short-term bond fund, short-term bond fund, bank fixed deposits, arbitrage fund. Don't dabble in equity market.
May I request Manoj Saraf of MS Securities to ask his question? Manoj Saraf.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening. It is a great experience listening to Nilesh. My query is specific to investment. My voice is audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay. My investment horizon is 5-year plus. And I was wondering if I go for public sector enterprises into the manufacturing, not the banking, and I go for the ETFs like CPSC ETF, whether it is the right investment for 5-year plus horizon?
Manoj bhai, you are from the market, as I understand from your description. Now, in today's environment, obviously, manufacturing public sector enterprise is very, very cheap from a value point of view. But at the same time, they have not delivered great return to investors as they have multiple objectives. Many private enterprises give higher weightage to shareholder return. Of course, they do take care of society, they do take care of employees, they do take care of other stakeholders, but their primary objective is shareholders. In the case of public sector enterprises in financial services as well as manufacturing, they have conflicting objectives where they have to work for employees, government, social objectives, and also shareholders. Unlike a private enterprise whose main focus is shareholder and everything else is ancillary, in many public sector enterprises, everything else is main objective and shareholder return is ancillary. In this scenario, it makes sense to remain invested with private sector enterprises than public sector enterprises. PSUs have great assets, great talent, great manpower, but because they're driving multiple objectives, they are trying to achieve conflicting objectives, they does not necessarily end up creating great shareholder value. And which is why my recommendation is that on a 5-year horizon, try to be overweight private sector enterprises. You can put some money in public sector enterprises on manufacturing side, but by and large, you should be overweight private sector enterprises.
Sorry, can I have Mr. Salim Govani from Foresight Holdings Private Limited to ask his question?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Nilesh.
Hi, Salim.
Am I audible as well? Okay.
Yes.
Nilesh, my question is actually a little different. It's more focused from the market perspective, not from humanitarian perspective. I'm wondering that if you look at India's budgetary deficit, which earlier used to be 6%, 10%, we've brought that down to 3%. So we have the capability, or we can easily spend much more. Look at what the US and the Europeans are doing. They're spending almost 10-12% of their budgets. So do you think it is advisable for our government to go in for borrowings? Because whatever we see today, what they call a stimulus, is actually not a stimulus. It's more like a liquidity bridge. They're giving you a loan. Loan cannot be termed as a stimulus. You have to pay that back anyway. But look at what the Europeans, the US, I understand, is spending almost $5,000 per household. Plus, they're spending another $2 trillion for industry. So, is that possibility? Do you think that could be a possibility for India? And the second question that I have is, are we very scarily, over the last couple of years, moving back to what we were in the 70s and 80s, becoming very more socialist than what we should be? That do we need more market players in the government, people like you who can advise, that if you remember during Chidambaram's time, our finance minister Chidambaram, there was Montek Singh, Mr. Manmohan Singh was there, people who understood markets a little better. That's why I repeat, my question is more focused from the market perspective and not from the humanitarian perspective.
Undoubtedly, Salim bhai, we are one of the few countries in the world which have all the levers available. In US, interest rates are already near zero. How much more they can cut? In India, we can cut interest rates because our 10-year government yield is still 6% plus, and our repo rate is still 4.4%. We also have ability to provide fiscal stimulus because our debt to GDP ratio is 70%. In US, it is upwards of 100%. We have ability to create credit as a percentage of GDP is far lower, probably 1/4 of comparable to countries like China. We are one of the few countries which has a lot of dead assets like gold. Our gold holding is about $2 trillion, and that's completely lying in unaccounted economy in Tijori and safe deposit locker or in the vaults. That can be monetized and brought into the mainline economy. So we are one of the fortunate countries which have choice of either using monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus, credit creation, monetizing dead assets in order to support economy. In many Western world, they are already past that stage. For example, Bank of Japan had zero interest rate long before. Their credit to GDP and government debt to GDP has crossed our numbers long before, when probably I was a kid. And that's why they are going to higher and higher level of experimentation. Bank of Japan today is owner of almost all major Japanese companies, and they are the largest investor in Japanese equity market. US Fed has expanded their balance sheet beyond $6 trillion for the first time, and they have cut down interest rates to zero. They have provided financial intervention, and they have to now go to some next level. In our case, because we have the luxury of choosing which tool to use, we are using what we think is appropriate. Partly it is also driven by the fact that there are different standards for developed countries and developing countries. We have to work much harder to retain our rating. We have to work harder to retain investors' confidence. And hence, using monetary stimulus right now, keeping fiscal stimulus in pocket for a later stage is appropriate. We can argue we should do both the things together. But unlike Western world, who can throw things and speed is essence for them, we have to maintain balance between speed and accuracy. We have to optimize resource allocation rather than maximize resource allocation. Coming to your second question, does government have market-related people? My answer is yes. Whatever little interaction we have had with regulators like RBI, SEBI, or with Finance Ministry, we have always found them far more knowledgeable. They are as market savvy as one can expect them to be. However, we also must appreciate the current situation. Mexico is a country which hedges their oil. They are oil producing country. They go and hedge oil in forward market. When oil prices go higher, they lose money. When oil prices come down, they make money. But we have never seen Mexican citizens complaining that the government is losing money when they go and hedge themselves. Swiss National Bank in 1 year made $55 billion profit. In 1 year, they lost $30 billion profit. You never see headline in Swiss media or Swiss citizens saying that my central bank has become hedge fund. We also have to give space to our regulators, to our decision makers, that they can make legitimate errors. We want everyone to be perfect. Now, how will that perfection be possible? Unless until we develop that maturity for allowing our decision makers to make legitimate errors, I don't think so they will be in a position to take that risk. So as much as I want to blame regulators and policymakers for not taking risks, I must have to introspect myself. As society, have I given them the freedom to make legitimate errors?
Yeah, that's very wonderfully answered. Nilesh, as I may just tell the audience that Nilesh is also a part-time member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and I'm sure that he's interacting with a lot more bureaucrats and policymakers and political leaders than what he was earlier, if I may say so. Moving on to the next person, can I request Chandrakant Laharia of the World Health Organization to ask his question?
Thank you. Mr. Shah, so though we always refer the economic and social development together, however, if we go by the queues of migrants and poor on Indian highways in the past 6 weeks, it is a proof that social development and the mechanisms for social security in Indian workforce are far behind than the priority given to economic sector. And now that is behind, and we can call it before Corona era, BC. And if we say it's BC, then the new era, AD, will be after disease, Corona disease. And when we know that in AD now, the economic growth would be far slower than the earlier. In this, as we discussed, in this background, what specific steps should be taken by the government and other stakeholders for social development and social security, so to ensure that India does not face at least a similar social crisis that poor and migrants are on the streets without any social security? So what is your opinion and thought on that to be done by government and stakeholder? Thank you.
Chandrakant Bhai, the ideal society today in the world is probably in Scandinavian countries, where they have a set of citizens and leaders which have created a fairly less equal society. I wouldn't call it equal society. They also have inequality, but it is far lower compared to rest of the world. They've been able to take care of their vulnerable section of the society, and they probably gave us true model on the lines which you suggested. Now, how that happened? One, it's purely function of economic growth. If you have money, then only you can do charity. A poor cannot do charity in absolute terms as much as a rich person can do. In relative term, obviously, a poor can outperform a rich person by a big margin. So we have to pursue economic prosperity so that we'll have enough resources to take care of our poor people. Second, we also have to ensure that, like citizens in Scandinavian country who are responsible for the benefits which are given to them, we also develop similar culture. If we provide everything free to the segment of society and they stop working, then we can't create economic prosperity. People have to work. People have to be responsible for the benefits which are coming to them. And that will be function of right education, right upbringing, and character building. Combination of economic prosperity along with character building can create a society which is just, which is equal, and which takes care of its vulnerable part of the society. This is probably what our thinkers called Ram Rajya, where rich and poor, strong and weak coexist together.
Sandeep, are there more questions?
Yeah. I would like to call Mr. Prashant Maharshi to ask his question, please. Mr. Maharshi? In that case, I would call the next in queue, Mr. Gopal Singh. Mr. Gopal Singh, can you please ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, my question is this, that today, current scenario, many things are being raised about labor reforms. Do we need more things, more labor reforms in order to attract the MNCs or this opportunity which is being provided to India, as many MNCs are showing their concern to invest in India?
Yes, Gopal Bhai, we need lots of labor flexibility. today there are some 22 definitions of labor across various legislation. And there are 57 legislation which one has to comply. Now, what is this laws created? Their intention is to protect labor, but they ended up creating a rigidity where the entrepreneur says, I don't want to hire labor. He's happy to lower his business and he hires labor only when he's sure that he needs it desperately. In order to 4-5% labor force which is in organized sector, we have ensured that 95% labor remains in unorganized sector unprotected. What we have to create is an environment where entrepreneurs take care of their labor. You know, Tata Group launched their textile mill, if I remember correctly, Empress Mill in Nagpur. And at that point of time, they had provided a facility where their laborers can bring their kits. This is what we call in modern era crash. These crashes were created in Tata's first company. There was no law and Tata's created model for payment of gratuity, model for contribution to Provident Fund. Entrepreneurs will take care of their laborers. They also know the value of laborers in their business. But if we mandate everything by law and we make them very inflexible and rigid, then people will not be able to create as much employment opportunities, create as much hiring as possible. By bringing parity in labor laws at par with developed world or other emerging markets, we will give confidence to multinational companies as well as local businessmen that you will have flexibility to manage your labor cost, and we won't burden you with unnecessary rigidity. Flexibility in labor laws will be very, very crucial to attract foreign direct investment and improve business in India.
Mr. Prashant Maharshi, I think you are back. Can you please go ahead with your question? Mr. Maharshi.
Prashant ji, can you please unmute yourself? Can you please unmute yourself, Mr. Maharshi? Sandeep, can we move to the next person?
The next question is from Mr. Badrinath. Can you go ahead with your question?
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Badri. I'm a sports physio working in sports, and I'm a movement specialist also. So now I'm like virtually have to treat my patients with hands-on. Now in the present infectious situations, it's become a little bit difficult. Now my question is in the present crisis situation, what are the new areas of innovation areas that I have to look for, which can help my patients?
Sure. So Badri, my knowledge about sports is fairly limited, but can you create a WhatsApp coaching for your clients? You can be on Zoom or WhatsApp video call, and you can teach them what kind of exercise they have to do. I think this is one way to do this. Second, today, all of us are staying at home, not doing enough exercise. Can you provide your consultancy to people how to remain fit watching your videos? You can create a TikTok videos or a Facebook or YouTube channel about yourself, which trains people, which teaches people how to remain fit in this environment. By providing a technology-led solution, you will be able to overcome current situation. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, you will require physical contact in many cases, but this kind of solutions will allow you to pass this downturn. And hopefully when medical solution emerges, you will be able to run physical channel as well as digital channel in terms of your work.
Sandeep?
My list. Okay, I'd like to call Mr. Vishal K. Can you please ask a question? Mr. Vishal K.
I think we can move on.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Can I request Dr. Anup Palsokar to ask his question? Dr. Palsokar?
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
I am a regular investor in mutual funds since the past almost a decade. The average returns that we have seen over the past 3-4 years is anywhere in between 10 to 16% through, of course, SIPs. Is it advisable for an investor or a investor like me in mutual funds to continue with SIPs in this troubled time?
Dr. Palsekar, I hope you are a medical professional. And if that is true, then first accept our gratitude for the great work you and your community is doing. हम लोग तो सिर्फ बातें करते हैं, but आप लोग real काम करते हैं. So our gratitude for the same. Second, as you correctly mentioned, if you see last 10 years SIP return, and I'm just looking at my multi-cap fund, in the month of January 2020, 10-year SIP return was about 15%. In the month of March, because markets corrected heavily, it came down to 8%. And in the month of April, it became 10%. The range has gone from 15% to 8% to 10%. Clearly, this volatility is coming because we are measuring, let's say, 12,000 Nifty, at 7,600 Nifty, and at 9,000 Nifty. These are levels to buy, Dr. Saab. Obviously, markets will be volatile in the near term, but your fraternity will find out a medical solution. And once that happens, markets will go on the path of recovery. Whatever you have bought in this uncertain phase will return once medical solution emerges. So my recommendation will be to please continue your SIP. These are great levels to buy. Market very rarely gives you a time travel kind of opportunity. Today you can go back 4 years to buy large caps, 6 years to buy mid caps, and 9 years back to buy small cap. This is once in a lifetime opportunity which comes every decade, unfortunately. So please continue your SIP.
Thank you, Nilesh. Can I request Mr. Nitish Kumar to ask his question? I'll come back to Mr. Nitish Kumar. Is Mr. Mandar Chitre there? Mr. Mandar Chitre? As we wait for the audience, Nilesh, I wanted to check how have you been coping with the lockdown? What has been your personal experience?
It's been a fairly smooth transition. I have never ever stayed with my family for such a long period of time. So that's one positive part of this COVID-19 lockdown. Second, fortunately, our business has been able to move from physical to digital in a very smooth fashion. And this kind of Zoom and all other applications have come handy. So this lockdown has not been that stressful for me. Obviously, personally, it's a very difficult experience. My wife is a volunteer with one NGO, and she receives so many calls for help where she coordinates. And the kind of stories which you hear makes you humble. I'm definitely the most privileged lot of this society who doesn't have to worry about so many things which an ordinary citizen is facing. And this lockdown has taught me that we must appreciate the blessings which God has given to us, and whatever we could do to help society, help other citizens, other fellow people, we must do it.
Thank you so much, Nilesh. I think that was a very good parting note. We have got more than 300 questions, and I think we're kind of running out of time. So thank you, Nilesh, once again for joining us. And I would also like to thank our presenting partner, the Association of Mutual Funds of India, for this event. Hope to be in touch with you, Nilesh, soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's been really wonderful to have you along. Thank you.